The gratitude collar was a debt that choked stars. Commander Eva Rostova stood on the bridge of the starship Arbitrage, a vessel that was more ledger than warship. Outside the primary viewport, the Relth Union's fleet hung in silent geometric perfection against the black. Their ships were things of beauty, crystalline, and radiating a soft internal luminescence that belied the brutal truth of their economics. At the heart of their formation lay the Cradle Net, a rescue and development system now shackled to a doctrine of perpetual obligation. The Relth called it the Tithe of Gratitude. Rostova called it a collar, and she had come to break it. The first step was a formal inquiry, a public broadcast that would force their methods into the light. Fleet mind. What is their disposition? Rostova's voice was calm, a carefully cultivated stillness in the eye of a coming storm. The air around her shimmered as the Arbitrage's AI Lycurgus manifested a simple column of light. They are postured for compliance, Commander. They believe we are here to observe the final integration of the Fenrir system's debt. They have prepared a ceremony. Lycurgus's synthesized voice was a blend of 1,000 legal scholars, every syllable weighted with precedent. They do not perceive us as a threat. They perceive us as an audience. Good. Rostova turned to her legal officer, Jian Li. Are the mirror ledgers synced? Every energy transfer, every resource shipment, every life saved by their cradle net must be accounted for. Jian's fingers danced over a console, his face illuminated by cascading streams of data. Every jewel and every soul, Commander. We have a perfect immutable record cross-referenced with their own public ledgers. The math is clean. They would be judged by their own numbers. A civilian vignette flickered on a side screen, a mandatory planetary feed from Fenrir 4. A child no older than 5 held up a crudely woven doll to a Relth peacekeeper. The peacekeeper, encased in gleaming white armor, accepted the doll and then placed a small silver band around the child's wrist. It looked like a gift. It was a collar, a physical representation of an inherited debt that would bind her for life. The child smiled, not understanding the weight of the silver. Rostova's jaw tightened. This was the ceremony Lycurgus had mentioned, the final shackling of a generation. They're proud of this, murmured Tactical Officer Ben Carter, his gaze fixed on the screen. They actually believe they are uplifting these people. Belief is a powerful weapon, Rostova said, her eyes never leaving the Relth flagship. But a ledger is a better one. Open a channel to their lead vessel. Formal address only. She would not allow this to devolve into insults or threats. This would be a battle of protocols, a war fought with procedure and public record. This was how humanity had learned to fight its most important wars, not with plasma, but with principle. The universe remembers a debt paid, but it reveres a debt forgiven. The main viewport split, showing the bridge of the Relth command ship, the Benefactor's Hand. Its commander, a tall, willowy being named Prelate Cathar, inclined its head. Its face was a smooth, featureless ovid of pearl, its voice a series of soft, melodic chimes translated by the ship's computer. Commander Rostova, an unexpected honor. You have arrived in time to witness the culmination of our aid to the Fenrir system, a testament to the strength of the gratitude tithe. Prelate Cathar Rostova began, her voice even and clear, amplified across the public channels connecting the two fleets and the system below. Terran Mandate Command Ship Arbitrage formally requests a public inquiry into the terms of the gratitude tithe as applied to the peoples of Fenrir. We invoke the Intersystem Accord on Sapient Dignity Article 7, Section 4. A stillness fell over the Relth bridge. The melodic chimes of their background systems seemed to falter. Cathar's smooth face betrayed nothing, but the rigid set of its shoulders spoke volumes. They had expected an audience, not an audit. The law is a lever, and she had just found the fulcrum. Your request is irregular. Commander Cathar's translated voice stated a hint of steel beneath the velvet. The tithe is a matter of internal Relth union policy. Our methods are transparent and have been ratified by our own governing bodies. Your methods have resulted in the generational indenture of an entire species, Rostova countered, keeping her tone conversational. The accord is clear: no sapient being may be born into a state of inescapable servitude. We are not here to debate your internal policies. We are here to measure them against a standard to which we are all signatories. A quiet ping echoed on the bridge. It was Lycurgus confirming the Relth were now legally compelled to respond. They could refuse, but the political cost would be astronomical. A low hum emanated from the column of light that was Lycurgus. Commander, their legal counsel is conferring. They are searching for a procedural counter. I assess a 92% probability they will attempt to frame this as a cultural misunderstanding. The AI's logic was relentless, a cold, clear stream cutting through the mud of diplomacy. Let them try, Rostova said under her breath. The numbers don't have a culture. She could feel the eyes of her crew on her, the weight of their shared conviction. They were a strange kind of fleet, one that measured victory and rescinded contracts and balanced accounts. Their ship taught by numbers and remembered by ledgers, never by collars. This was their creed, the core of their purpose, in a galaxy that too often confused power with justice. A debt can be a weapon. A receipt can be a shield. On the civilian feed, the scene changed. An old man stood before a Relth administrator, his face etched with the lines of a hard life. He offered a small pouch of rare minerals, his entire life's work, as a payment against his family's debt. The administrator weighed it, consulted a datapad, and shook its head. The debt was too large. The minerals were a pittance. The old man's shoulders slumped, the hope draining from his eyes. The camera lingered on his face, broadcasting his quiet despair to the system. Rostova felt a cold anger coalesce in her chest. Prelate Rostova's voice cut through the silence, sharp and precise. We are not claiming a misunderstanding. We are claiming a violation. Your cradle net performs a rescue. It saves lives. We acknowledge this. But the price you exact transforms that rescue into a cage. You have created a system where the cost of being saved is the freedom of every generation that follows. Cathar's form seemed to stiffen. It is not a cage, Commander. It is a covenant. We invest immense resources, diverting them from our own people to uplift struggling worlds. The tithe ensures that this sacrifice is honored. It is a promise of shared prosperity, a bond of gratitude made tangible. There is a line between gratitude and servitude, and they had erased it. Rostova knew this was the heart of their argument, the moral shield they hid behind. The idea of gratitude was a powerful one, almost impossible to argue against. But she wasn't going to argue. She was going to count. Then you will have no objection to a public accounting, she pressed. Let us open the ledgers. Let us together review the full scope of your investment and the full measure of Fenrir's repayment. Let the galaxy see the balance of this covenant. We will proceed down a corridor of law prelate. Every transaction, every transfer broadcast for all to witness. No redactions, no summaries. This was the gambit. A corridor of law was a grueling, exhaustive process, a trial by relentless transparency. It was designed to expose truths buried under mountains of legal jargon and procedural obfuscation. For a society as obsessed with appearances as the Relth, it was a nightmare. To refuse would be an admission of guilt. To accept would be to hand Rostova the very weapon she needed. The silence stretched. On the Relth bridge, aides moved with frantic, hushed energy. Cathar stood motionless, a statue of pearlescent white. Rostova waited. She did not fidget. She did not look away. The arbitrage bridge was silent, the only sound the soft thrum of the life support systems. The tension was a physical thing, a pressure building against the hull. Finally, the translated chimes returned. "We will comply," Cathar stated. The words sounded like cracking ice. "The Relth Union has nothing to hide. We welcome the opportunity to demonstrate the benevolence of our methods. Prepare your auditors, Commander." The connection snapped shut. A collective quiet exhale swept through the human bridge. Jian Li wiped a bead of sweat from his brow. They took the bait. I didn't think they'd actually agree to it. Their pride demanded it. Lycurgus stated, its light pulsing gently. Their entire socio-political structure is built upon the perception of their unimpeachable generosity. To refuse a public audit would shatter that foundation. It was the only move they could make. A man forced to explain his virtue. A loud often reveals its absence. Rostova nodded, a grim smile touching her lips for the first time. They've opened the door. Now we walk through it. Lycurgus, prepare the mirror arrays. Link them to their public ledger system. Every entry they show us, we reflect back, verified and cost-audited against Galactic standard rates. This was the other half of her strategy. It wasn't enough to show the debt. She had to show the profit. "Ben, I want our ship's sensors focused on their fleet. Not for weapons, but for energy signatures. I want to know how much power they're drawing from the local star, from the gas giant, from the very background radiation of this system." Carter's eyes widened in understanding. "You think they're charging for ambient energy?" "I think they're charging for everything," Rostova replied. "The Cradle Net is a rescue service, but the Union is a corporation, and a corporation's first duty is to its shareholders. Justice begins with an honest audit." The corridor of law began. It was not a dramatic courtroom showdown, but a slow, methodical dissection of data. Screens on the arbitrage bridge filled with Relth accounting records, line after line of impenetrable code and unfamiliar symbols. But Lycurgus, with Jian Li guiding its focus, translated it all. The AI was a force of pure reason, stripping away the ornate language of the Relth contracts to reveal the stark machinery beneath. The first day was spent on infrastructure. The Relth had built atmospheric processors, water purifiers, and power grids for the Fenririans. The ledgers showed the cost of these projects, a staggering sum. But as Lycurgus activated the mirror ledgers, a second set of figures appeared alongside the first. The human calculations, based on standardized galactic material and labor costs, were a fraction of the Relth's. "They've inflated their material costs by over 400%, Jian murmured, his voice a mixture of awe and disgust. "They've billed for 16 times the actual labor hours. They've even charged for the transit time of the construction ships, calculated at a premium risk tariff. And the interest," Rostova added, pointing to a flickering line of code. "Compounded daily." "What's the effective rate?" Lycurgus calculated against the principal. "The annual percentage rate is 9,812%, the AI replied without inflection. "It is a predatory loan structure designed to be mathematically impossible to repay. A predator can wear the mask of a savior." The information was broadcast system-wide. On Fenrir 4, people gathered around public broadcast screens, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. They had always been told the debt was vast, a sacred obligation. They had never been told it was a lie. Cathar's voice, now stripped of its melodic confidence, came over the comm. "These are our standard rates, Commander. They reflect the quality and reliability of Relth engineering. Your Galactic standard is a benchmark for inferior mass-produced technology. The water purifiers you installed are based on a design that is publicly available on the Citadel archives." Rostova countered calmly, not looking at Cathar's image. She addressed the data, the ultimate authority in this contest. Your engineers made minor cosmetic alterations. The core function is identical. You took a public good, repackaged it, and sold it as a priceless artifact. The ledger does not lie, prelate. The second day focused on humanitarian aid. Food shipments, medical supplies, educational programs. Again, the Relth ledgers showed astronomical costs. And again, the mirrored accounts of the arbitrage told a different story. They had charged for nutritional supplements that were little more than colored water. They had billed for advanced medical nanites that were in fact simple antibiotic pastes. They had delivered educational software with built-in subscription fees that triggered after the first year, adding a new layer of debt for the children they were supposedly enlightening. The most effective chains are forged from good intentions. On the civilian feed, a woman, a teacher, wept openly. She had praised the Relth for their gift of knowledge. Now she saw that she had been leading her students into a new kind of prison, one of the mind. Her sorrow was a palpable force, a wave of grief that washed over the bridge of the arbitrage. Rostova felt it, a cold weight in her stomach. This was the human cost of the Relth's beautiful, terrible math. Commander Ben Carter's voice was tense. I have the energy readings you asked for. It's worse than we thought. He projected a new set of data onto the main screen. It was a complex energy flow diagram of the Fenrir system. The Relth fleet, serene and glowing, was at the center of a vast invisible web. They're not just drawing power for their own fleet's operations, he explained, his finger tracing a faint blue line. Their cradle net array is a massive energy siphon. It's pulling ambient stellar radiation and converting it a net gain. And according to their own ledgers, he highlighted a corresponding section of the Relth's accounting. Janley gasped. They are charging the Fenririans for it. They are charging the Fenririans for their own sunlight. The ultimate theft is to sell a man the air he breathes. It was a revelation of such profound, simple villainy that it stunned the bridge into silence. The Relth were not just predatory lenders. They were parasites of a cosmic scale. They had turned the very star that gave the Fenririans life into another source of unending debt. Rostova stared at the data, the pieces clicking into place. This was the escalation she had been waiting for. It was the key. It was the one charge so egregious, so fundamentally morally bankrupt, that not even the Relth's twisted logic could defend it. Lycurgus, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Is the mirror array capable of reversal? The column of light flickered. The energy converters are bidirectional by design, Commander. It is a standard failsafe. With the correct command protocols, we can reverse the flow. The AI's tone was for the first time laced with something that sounded like anticipation. Prelate Cathar. Rostova's voice boomed across the comm, drawing the Relth commander's attention. We have a new item for the ledger. Let's discuss energy costs. Let's discuss the price of a star. Her eyes were locked on the prelate's image. There was no more negotiation in her voice. There was only judgment. A wave of panic was visible on the Relth bridge for the first time. Their composure finally cracked. Cathar's featureless face seemed to shrink, the smooth surface no longer conveying serenity, but a blank, sterile fear. It had no answer. The accusation was monstrous because it was true. That data is misinterpreted, Cathar stammered, the translated voice losing its cohesion. Our arrays simply stabilize the local energy field, a service to prevent stellar flares, a service for which you have charged them 1 trillion credits per cycle. Lycurgus interjected, its voice cold as the void. A service for which there is no scientific basis. The Fenrir star is in a stable main sequence phase. It has not produced a significant flare in over 2 billion years. The truth has a weight all its own. Rostova stood. The corridor of law has reached its end, prelate. We have established in public view a pattern of fraudulent accounting, predatory lending, and systemic exploitation. You have not uplifted this world. You have devoured it. You have put a collar on a star system and called it gratitude. She paused, letting the words hang in the space between the fleets. Now comes the accounting. Lycurgus initiate mirror protocol justice. The arbitrage began to glow, not with the soft internal light of the Relth ships, but with a hard, brilliant silver. Arrays unfolded from its hull like the petals of a metallic flower, aligning not on the Relth fleet, but on the vast invisible structure of the cradle net itself. A new set of numbers began to scroll on the public broadcast. It was a single cascading bill. It was the total verified cost of the Relth's aid, calculated at fair market value. It was subtracted from the total verified repayment made by the Fenririans in labor resources and energy. The final number was not a debt owed by Fenrir. It was a staggering surplus. It was a refund. A debt overpaid is a theft revealed. According to our audit, Rostova announced, her voice ringing with the authority of a final verdict. The Fenrir system has overpaid its tithe by a factor of 73. We are therefore issuing a formal demand for repayment on their behalf. But that is not all. The silver light from the arbitrage intensified. A powerful beam of pure data and energy lashed out, not a weapon, but a key. It struck the central hub of the cradle net. It did not damage it. It seized it. The energy you have siphoned from their star, for which you have illegally charged them, is not yours to keep, Rostova declared. We are returning it. Across the system, the Relth ships began to flicker. Their soft internal lights dimmed. Alarms audible even over the calm blared on their bridges. The power they had stolen was being drawn back, pulled from their own systems through the conduit of their own network. The energy was being mirrored, sent back to its source. It was a cost returned. What are you doing? Cathar shrieked, the melodic chimes replaced by a harsh, discordant panic. This is an act of war. No prelate, Rostova corrected, her voice like ice. This is an act of accounting. You are experiencing a margin call on a cosmic scale. We are not firing a single weapon. We are simply balancing the ledger. The books must always balance one way or another. The civilian feeds from Fenrir 4 showed a dawning, incredulous joy. People were pointing to the sky. The silver collars on their wrists linked to the Relth debt network began to fall away, clattering to the ground like broken toys. The child from the earlier broadcast stared at her bare wrist, a look of wonder on her face. The old man who had offered his life's work now stood, tall tears streaming down his face. A cheer began to ripple through the crowds, a sound of impossible, unexpected liberation. On the bridge of the arbitrage, the crew watched their faces, grimly satisfied. This was their victory. It was not loud or explosive. It was quiet, mathematical, and absolute. They had won not by destroying their enemy, but by forcing them to live by their own twisted rules turned back upon themselves. Commander Lycurgus reported its light a steady, unwavering pillar. The Relth fleet's power reserves are at critical levels. Their primary systems are failing. The cradle net is now under our administrative control. Release it, Rostova ordered. Sever all its connections to the Relth Union. Transfer ownership and operational control to the Fenririan system government. Provide them with the full, unredacted technical manuals and a 5-year scholarship fund for their engineers to be paid for from the Relth's surplus. And the surplus itself, Commander Gian asked. The monetary refund. Rostova looked at this broken fleet of the Relth, now dark and drifting. She looked at the jubilant faces on the planet below. A plan colder and more precise than simple repayment was forming in her mind. This wasn't just about Fenrir. This was about every world the Relth had ever saved. The first victory is survival. The second is precedent. Lycurgus, she said, begin a system-wide scan. Cross-reference the Relth ledger architecture, with every known system where they have deployed a cradle net. I want a list of all their other victims. The AI's light pulsed with immense processing power. Scan initiated. Preliminary results are extensive, Commander. At least 64 other systems are currently under a gratitude tithe. Then our work is not done, Rostova said. The first plan-changing escalation had been the reveal of the energy theft. This was the second. Her mission was no longer to free one system. It was to shatter an empire of debt. Send a message to the Terran Mandate High Command. Inform them that the arbitrage has established a viable legal and technical precedent to dismantle the Relth Union's economic model. We are no longer conducting an inquiry. We are initiating a class action lawsuit on a galactic scale. Before her, the great public ledger of the Fenrir system began to update. The crushing debt, a number with more zeros than a man could count in a lifetime, was erased. In its place, a new entry blinked into existence: creditors. The debt had been mirrored. The collars had been broken. And for the first time in a century, a people were looking up at their own sun and not wondering how much it would cost them. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about resetting the balance to zero. A cold fury radiated from the image of Prelate Cathar. Its fleet was dark adrift and publicly humiliated. Yet the translated chimes that formed its voice were no longer panicked. They were forged into something new, something far more dangerous: the chillingly precise cadence of legal retribution. Commander Rostova, you have committed an unprecedented act of piracy under the guise of a legal inquiry. You have violated our sovereign space, seized our assets, and incited insurrection. You have mistaken a disagreement over terms for a license to wage war. I have enforced a contract and returned stolen property. Rostova countered, her voice a placid sea against his storm. The only act of war here has been the one you have silently waged against the people of Fenrir for a century. The Aurora Court of Inter-System Precedent will be the judge of that, Cathar retorted, a sliver of triumph in its tone. We have already filed a primary writ of grievance. Your actions have been logged as an attack on a signatory member of the Elder Compact. You will answer for them. Not in a military tribunal, Commander. In a place where your ledgers and your self-righteous fury will be weighed against laws 1,000 times your species' age. The prelate had pivoted, transforming itself from a debtor into a plaintiff. It was a masterful legal maneuver. A pivot from defense to prosecution is the sharpest blade in law. The transmission cut. Jianli swore, a sharp, explosive sound in the quiet of the bridge. They're suing us after everything we just proved. It's a perfect strategy, Lycurgus stated, the light of its column shifting to a deep, contemplative blue. They are changing the venue and the narrative. We were the auditors, the heroes. Now they will paint us as violent aggressors who took the law into our own hands. They will try to bury the truth of the tithe under a mountain of procedural violations. Rostova's mind raced. Cathar was right. The Aurora Court was a different beast entirely. It did not deal in simple audits. It dealt in foundational precedents that shaped the interactions of entire quadrants. To be summoned there as a defendant was a peril of the highest order. Ben, she ordered, her voice sharp, what's the status of the other 64 systems? Carter's fingers flew across his console. News of Fenrir is spreading. We're seeing disruptions. On a dozen worlds, planetary governments are citing our findings and refusing tithe payments. On 3 others, there are open riots near Relth administrative centers. The first spark of rebellion is always a refusal to pay. This was the consequence of their public inquiry. They had lit a fire. Now they would have to keep it from consuming the very people they had sought to save. The Relth would undoubtedly use this unrest as further evidence of Rostova's recklessness. A new communication request blinked on the main screen. It was not from the Relth or from Terran Command. The icon was an ancient stylized representation of a balanced scale held within the heart of a star. The Aurora Court. Rostova straightened her uniform jacket, a purely human gesture of preparing for battle. On screen. The image that appeared was not a being, but a symbol, the same glowing scale, pulsing, with a slow, inexorable rhythm. A voice ancient and resonant speaking in flawless Terran standard filled the bridge. It was a voice that sounded like stone grinding against stone, a voice that had spoken civilizations into and out of existence. Commander Eva Rostova, Terran Mandate Vessel Arbitrage. A grievance has been filed against you by the Relth Union under the Elder Compact Section Gamma. You are hereby summoned to the seat of the court at Meridian. You will present your vessel and your testimony. You will answer the charge of sovereign trespass and unlawful seizure of assets. You have 1 cycle. The symbol flared once, then vanished. There was no room for negotiation. A summons from the Aurora Court was not a request. It was a fundamental law of the galaxy, like gravity. You do not argue with the tide. You sail with it or you sink. So that's it then, Ben Carter said, his voice heavy. We're the ones on trial. Yes, Rostova said, a strange calm settling over her. The third escalation had arrived. Her plan to prosecute the Relth had been turned on its head. Now her own freedom and the reputation of the Terran Mandate were on the line. But they have made a grave error. They have given us a platform. A courtroom is a stage. We were going to speak to a system. Now we will speak to the galaxy. Before they could begin the long journey to Meridian, Rostova had a duty to fulfill. A small shuttle bearing her and a single diplomatic aide descended to the surface of Fenrir 4. She met with the newly formed provisional government in a building that had until 2 days ago been a Relth tithe collection center. The air still smelled of their sterile ozone-like scent. The faces of the Fenririan leaders were a mixture of exhaustion, disbelief, and a fragile, terrifying hope. An elder, his skin like cured leather, stepped forward. Commander, you have given us back our sky. We have no words to match such a gift. It was never mine to give. Rostova replied, her voice gentle. It was always yours. The cradle net is now under your control. The surplus credit is in your treasury. Use it to build, to teach, to heal. She offered them a datapad. This contains our complete findings, every piece of evidence. I am asking for your permission to use it in my defense. It will mean broadcasting the full extent of your suffering to the galaxy. The elder took the datapad with a trembling hand. He did not hesitate. For a century we suffered in silence. If our story can be a weapon for others, then you have our blessing. Let the galaxy hear. Let them know what was done here. A voice unheard is a wound unhealed. The journey to Meridian was a week of relentless preparation. The bridge of the arbitrage was transformed into a legal war room. Jian Li and his team worked in shifts, sleeping at their consoles, poring over millennia of Aurora Court case law. Lycurgus was the heart of the operation, its processing core running hot, as it cross-referenced every statute and precedent, searching for a weakness and angle. Rostova spent her time reviewing the stories of the other victims. A civilian vignette from a world called Xylos filled her screen. The Xylans were a species of silicon-based life forms that communicated through resonating crystals. The Relth, in their wisdom, had determined that this method of communication was insufficient for advanced societal development. They had provided the Xylans with vocal translators, a gift that came with a staggering price tag. But the translators were imperfect, stripping the Xylons' resonant language of all its subtlety and emotion. The vignette showed a Xylon elder trying to tell a traditional story to a group of children. The translated words were flat, lifeless. The children, bored, drifted away. The elder ceased the story, its crystals dimming, with a sorrow that needed no translation. The Relth hadn't just put them in debt, they had stolen their culture's voice. A debt of words is the cruelest tax. Another story came from the Halcyon Drift. The people there were avian, their greatest joy, the freedom of flight. The Relth had saved them from a rogue asteroid, a genuine act of rescue. But the price was the planet's atmosphere. The Relth installed atmospheric tithe stations that thickened the air, making flight difficult and exhausting, except in designated low-density zones for which one had to pay a fee. They had sold the people their own sky, but in pieces. They had put a price on the wind. These were the stories Rostova would carry with her. Her case would not be built on numbers alone. It would be built on the testimony of silenced poets and grounded flyers. It would be built on the quiet, enduring pain of 65 worlds. Meridian was not a planet. It was a construct of impossible scale, a shell of crystalline latticework and shimmering energy fields built around a stable white dwarf star. This was the seat of the Aurora Court. The arbitrage was a speck as it approached, guided into a docking cradle reserved for litigants. The air inside the station was ancient, smelling of dust and ozone and the faint metallic tang of immense power. The light was the soft, perpetual twilight of the captured star, filtered through prisms that cast rainbows of raw data onto the polished floors. Gravity, both literal and metaphorical, anchored the station. The courtroom itself was a vast amphitheater carved from a single moon-sized asteroid suspended at the heart of the shell. There were no chairs, only designated standing areas for the prosecution, the defense, and the observers. At the focal point on a raised dais sat the adjudicators. There were 3 of them, silent and immense. They were not biological beings, nor were they AIs in the way Lycurgus was. They were something else, beings of pure law and precedent who had served the court for longer than most species had been spacefaring. Their forms were indistinct, shrouded in shimmering fields of disruptive energy. One did not look at an adjudicator. One felt their immense impartial attention. Prelate Cathar stood in the prosecution's area, flanked by a team of Relth legal scholars in stark white robes. They looked confident at home. This was their territory, a place of ancient rules and subtle interpretations. Rostova stood alone, flanked only by the silent, glowing column of light that was Lycurgus. She was the outsider, the upstart, the barbarian, who had used force instead of filing the proper motions. The weight of the court's history of 1,000 landmark decisions pressed down on her. The law is a sea. It is easy to drown if you do not know the currents. The central adjudicator's voice filled the chamber, the same one from the summons. This court is now in session. The grievance of the Relth Union versus Commander Eva Rostova of the Terran Mandate will now be heard. Prelate Cathar, you may begin. Cathar stepped forward, its form radiating a solemn dignity. Honored adjudicators, we are not here to dispute the mathematics of a rescue contract. We are here because a sacred line was crossed, the line between audit and assault. The commander of the Terran vessel Arbitrage appointed herself judge, jury, and executioner over the affairs of a sovereign elder race. Cathar's presentation was brilliant. It barely mentioned the Fenririans or the details of the tithe. Instead, it showed the court logs from the Arbitrage. It played recordings of Rostova's commands. It displayed the energy readings of the mirror array as it drained the Relth fleet. The narrative was simple and powerful. A foreign military vessel acting on its own authority had violently disabled a fleet engaged in peaceful internal administration. The commander claims she was balancing a ledger. Cathar's translated voice resonated with sorrowful reason. But one does not balance a ledger with an energy weapon. One does not seize control of a billion-credit infrastructure project as a form of repayment. These are the actions of a pirate, not an auditor. If any entity, no matter how righteous they believe their cause, can unilaterally attack another based on their own interpretation of a contract, then the rule of law itself collapses. There would be only chaos. A justification for chaos is the tyrant's first prayer. Cathar concluded. We ask the court to find this commander guilty of sovereign trespass. We ask that her vessel be impounded, and that the Terran mandate be censured and ordered to pay reparations for this reckless act of aggression. We do this not for vengeance, but for order, for the preservation of the very laws that allow us all to coexist. The prelate returned to its place. A heavy silence filled the chamber. Cathar had made a powerful case. He had not defended the indefensible tithe. He had simply condemned Rostova's methods. He had made her the villain of the story. The central adjudicator turned its immense attention to Rostova. Commander, you have heard the charge. What is your reply? Rostova stepped forward, her heart pounding. Her uniform felt stiff, her boots heavy on the ancient stone. Honored adjudicators. She began, her voice steady and clear. I am a soldier, not a lawyer. I will not argue the finer points of precedent. I am here to speak about the difference between a law and a leash. She gestured to Lycurgus. The AI projected a single image into the center of the chamber for all to see, the silver collar being placed on the wrist of the smiling child on Fenrir 4. The Relth Union claims I violated their sovereignty. But what is sovereignty? Is it the right of a government to rule its people, or is it the right of a government to own them? She did not defend her actions. Not yet. Instead, she did exactly what Cathar had avoided. She told the story of the gratitude tithe. Guided by Lycurgus, she presented the ledgers, the inflated costs, the predatory interest rates. But she framed it not as a financial crime, but as a moral one. She showed the court, the Xylan elder, his culture's voice silenced. She showed them the grounded avians of the Halcyon Drift. When the law protects the predator, the law is the crime. The prelate is correct, Rostova said, her voice rising with controlled passion. I did not follow standard procedure. I did not file a subluminal motion and wait 50 years for a preliminary hearing while 65 worlds bled. I was faced with a crime in progress, a crime of such scale and duration that it had become normalized, hidden behind the beautiful word gratitude. She turned to face Cathar directly. You speak of order, but the order you imposed was that of a prison. You speak of law, but the laws you wrote were the bars of a cage. The Aurora Court exists to interpret the law. But there are certain truths that precede law. A child cannot be born into bondage. A people cannot be charged for the light of their own sun. These are not legal arguments. They are the axioms upon which all justice is built. My actions were not an assault. She declared, her voice ringing through the vast chamber. They were a rescue. I did not fire a weapon. I returned stolen property. I did not invade a sovereign nation. I liberated a hostage. The charge is sovereign trespass, I ask you. Adjudicators, what is the sovereignty of a people who do not own their own lives? An empty phrase cannot shield a guilty hand. The courtroom was utterly still. Rostova had reframed the debate. This was no longer about her methods. It was about the fundamental definition of freedom. Cathar, seeing the ground shifting beneath it, played its final, most powerful card. It stepped forward, its voice ringing with ancient authority. The commander speaks of axioms, but she ignores the highest law of this court, the Elder Compact. The compact to which my people were founding signatories grants broad, almost limitless latitude to elder races in the uplifting of less developed species. It recognizes that the path to galactic citizenship can be difficult. Our methods, our tithe, are an expression of our unique cultural approach to this sacred duty. The commander asks you to judge our culture a right the Elder Compact expressly forbids. This was the trump card Rostova and Lycurgus had anticipated. The Elder Compact was a nearly unassailable piece of legislation written to prevent powerful species from imposing their own values on others. It was a shield of cultural relativism. The tithe is our way, Cathar concluded, its voice softening. It may seem harsh to an outsider, but it is the bond that has lifted dozens of worlds from darkness. To condemn it is to condemn us. It is an act of cultural genocide. The last refuge of a scoundrel is to call his crimes his culture. A ripple of energy passed between the adjudicators. The argument was a strong one. The Elder Compact was a pillar of galactic law. To challenge it was to risk destabilizing the entire system. Rostova felt a chill of doubt. Had she come all this way only to be defeated by a clause in an ancient treaty? It was then that Lycurgus's column of light pulsed a single brilliant flash. The AI had been silent throughout the testimony, a mere projector of evidence. Now it spoke. Its voice was not the synthesized blend of scholars it used on the arbitrage. This was a new voice, deeper, more complex, resonating with the same ageless quality as the adjudicators themselves. Adjudicators of the Aurora Court. Lycurgus began. I have analyzed the full text of the Elder Compact. All 7 million articles and subclauses. The prelate is correct. It protects cultural methodology. However, the compact itself is built upon a more foundational legal principle, a first precedent upon which this very court was established. It is known as the sapient paradox. A low hum filled the chamber. Even the adjudicators seemed to focus more intently. The sapient paradox was a philosophical concept, more than a legal one, the bedrock of their entire system. The paradox is this, Lycurgus explained, its voice holding the entire court rapt. The ultimate measure of a sapient being is its capacity to make choices. Therefore, the ultimate crime is not murder, but the removal of choice itself. An action which reduces a sapient being's capacity for future choice is an act of existential destruction. It is the murder of a future. The AI projected a new diagram into the air. It was a complex, branching visualization of a single Fenririan's life under the tithe. Every major life decision, career, family, home was shown to be dictated by the demands of the inherited debt. The tree of choice had been pruned down to a single straight line of servitude. The gratitude tithe is not a cultural method of uplift, Lycurgus stated, its logic irrefutable. It is a machine for the systematic destruction of choice. It does not uplift species. It curates them like livestock. It violates the first precedent. The Elder Compact cannot protect a culture whose central practice is the antithesis of the very principle that gives the compact its legitimacy. The law cannot be a shield for that which destroys the law's own foundation. Lycurgus had not found a loophole. It had found the source code. It had mirrored the Relth's own legal history back at them, showing them that their modern empire was a corruption of the very ideals their ancestors had helped champion. The silence that followed was absolute. Cathar stood frozen, its legal shield shattered. It had no response. It had built its entire case on a fortress, only to have the AI prove that the ground beneath it was hollow. The central adjudicator's energy field seemed to brighten. Its voice, when it came, was final. The court has reached a verdict. On the charge of sovereign trespass against Commander Eva Rostova, we find her not guilty. Her actions, while irregular, were a proportional response to an ongoing crime against sapience. A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled Rostova's knees washed over her. Furthermore, the adjudicator continued, its voice growing colder, harder. This court finds that the Relth Union's practice of the gratitude tithe is a direct violation of the first precedent. It is hereby declared an illegal practice under Galactic law. The Elder Compact's protections are declared null and void in this matter. The adjudicator turned its attention to Cathar. All existing tithes across all 65 systems are declared void and unenforceable. All property and assets seized under the tithe are to be returned. A full accounting of overpayments will be conducted by this court, and reparations will be assessed. The Relth Union's privileged status as an Elder Compact signatory is hereby suspended pending a full review of your internal governance. It was a total victory, more than Rostova had ever dared to hope for. It was not just an acquittal. It was a revolution codified into law. The cost, however, was still to be counted. As they prepared to leave Meridian, a message came through from Ben Carter, who had remained with the ship. He had accepted a position as a senior analyst at a legal institute on Jupiter. "I'm sorry, Commander," his message read, "but I've seen enough conflict. I think I can do more good analyzing the law than I can staring at a tactical display. We won, but it was too close." The fight had cost her a good officer burned out by the sheer weight of what they had done. Another message arrived from Terran Command. It was a formal commendation for Rostova, but it came with a private encrypted addendum from her fleet admiral. "Eva, you've made us proud. You've also made us a very powerful, very quiet enemy. The Relth will never forgive this. Watch your back. The victory of the law does not always mean the end of the war." The win was real, but it had come at the price of a lasting, bitter peace. Back on the bridge of the arbitrage, the ship charting a course for home Rostova stood before the main viewport. Lycurgus projected an image beside her. It was a live feed from the Aurora Court's great public ledger, the immutable record of galactic law. A new entry was blinking the text, settling from a bright active blue to the permanent solid gold of established precedent. Precedent 734. The Rostova Doctrine. A debt may not be inherited. The freedom of choice is an inalienable right. The act of saving a life does not confer ownership of it. The great court beacon of Meridian, a spire of light that served as a lighthouse for travelers, and a symbol of the law, began to cool its cycle of judgment complete. Rostova watched the ledger entry burn itself into history. Justice, she realized, wasn't a single glorious act. It was a grind. It was the tedious work of balancing books, the exhaustion of a legal battle, the courage to stand before an ancient power and speak a simple truth. It wasn't about vengeance or destruction. It was about making things right, no matter the cost, and then ensuring they could never be made so wrong again. The ledger is the memory of the universe. Make sure you write a truth worth remembering.